This one's going to be, I'm not entirely sure how long this is going to be. Got to talk about a lot of things about the human body. So, but it won't be anything too complicated. I will definitely try to keep it as simple as possible. But one thing most people are may not be as aware of is what a human body could possibly do, said, without being totally superhuman. It always kind of seems as though that when you see, various characters, fighting evil that don't actually have any superhuman strength, they still seem to be able to defeat something. Defeat something like a robot that is probably going to be made out of something, fairly durable, but easily repaired when necessary. Think of it kind of like certain variations of Power Rangers, where when they are going up against certain types of creatures, maybe even like in the pilot episode where they don't actually have any powers yet, and sometimes they might be able to hold their own for a little bit, but then they get easily overwhelmed. And this definitely could can definitely let you know kind of what you're dealing with because um, the human body does have an incredible reserve of strength in it. I'll actually talk more about that another time, but we only use a very tiny amount of it, and that's only during an adrenaline surge. And the problem is that while this power may allow a woman to lift a car, to save a child, it is basically the equivalent of basically flooring it in a car that gets very poor gas mileage, and it said the tank is running a bit on the low side. So you can almost would say it's like how in the Fast and the Furious they have the nitrous oxide boost. It's kind of like that, but the idea is that everything is very overheated, and you have to kind of wait for everything to cool down. In this case, after a while you're jittery. You start feeling nauseous because your digestive system actually shuts down for a little while when you actually are going, um, instead of going through an adrenaline surge. So it's there. So what exactly is said? But that doesn't actually mean that there can't be other types of attributes. I mean, you definitely can see like very strong men lifting a lot of weights. I forget exactly what the competition is, but they once showed these guys moving like 800 pound um, like stone slabs, and it definitely did show like they were trained enough to actually use everything, but they still acknowledge like, wow, this is still pretty heavy. It's almost as though you can definitely push yourself to said to train it, but it seems like you know it always seems like the pinnacle of strength for most people is lifting 4 times your own body weight. Because and even then that may take a while to actually achieve, because if anyone's ever tried to do a pull up, you kind of have to find your rhythm to use it, and you may only do like 2 or 3, and it's like you just can't use it. Like your body is not used to using your arms to pull itself up. I mean, your arms are not built like your legs. In this case, we're not gorillas. It's like seems like the most we could definitely while they always say lift with your legs, you don't want to be like the equivalent of having like a T-Rex. You know, a lot of strength in the legs, but your arms barely do anything, and even then. So even if you're somewhat more, then you have to worry about sharp corners, trying to navigate whatever you're using, whatever you're trying to go. But I do know that rock climbers can actually lift themselves up by just kind of having one finger each. I'm not entirely sure if they could actually eventually use their pinkies, but if they can actually use it and kind of pull themselves off the ground, kind of hold it for a while, that's quite impressive. I've actually seen videos where they barely have any real, not much of a ledge, but the person is actually able to hold on for a good while. So, but just because you can maybe hold that in your hands, maybe your arms really can't, somehow cannot take everything. I mean, one I've actually seen a video of this guy basically using these fingers to actually balance on something, and everyone's just bashful, and there's like a big "do not attempt" warning. But you would think that if someone could actually balance that much in their own fingers, they should definitely be able to lift, so much more, like it's nothing. But the problem is that our bones and muscles are very fragile. They can definitely take enough of a beating, but going too much too quickly will cause it to break down. Kind of like essentially the Kaioken, or if you're a Naruto fan, what happens to Rock Lee when he opens all of his gates, or most of the gates. Just the fact that he's just like the first gate basically says this is what you actually can do with the power, and then all of a sudden, then he starts to actually awaken them a lot more. But okay, but some things that also might be considered to be a little bit more unnatural might actually be someone who has a pretty good sense of smell, like basically professional sniffers that can, detect, the faintest odor of something, like wine snobs. In the movie Hannibal, Clarice actually noticed there was a particular odor in the letter she got from Hannibal Lecter, and the guy was like holding it up, making thing. It was like, say, okay, this is hand cream raw. It's a raw ambergris base, but he smelled something else, and the woman, the female version of him, actually just said fleece. So, and just like the fact that it's like literally sniffing, Dr. Pepper, you know exactly what flavors are in which. So that could definitely be impressive, but your sense of smell is not really meant to be that overly powerful. It's just almost as though, if you're around a place that has a very bad odor, like if you were to work in a police department where there's definitely a morgue, you know, you're eventually just not, you don't notice what, the smell actually is. And even in this case, a lot of people actually say that our lungs, if you were to put them, take them out and just smell them, smell horrible, yet, you know, we're always told to breathe through our nose, and we don't smell anything, you know, like too vile if we didn't already make it. It's just like, don't smell anything. Instead, but that doesn't mean you should just try to overstimulate your nose, because you can still cause some kind of damage. Is it oversaturate everything? And then if it's like so bad that you could actually taste it, ugh, that would be awful. I mean, but on the good side, someone might be able to detect, what secret ingredients actually are. Like they're blindfolded, and they would give them a taste test because, like in Hell's Kitchen, they always kind of have like the palate test, and sometimes people, it's like here's a simple cheddar cheese, and they say it's something else. Like, and sometime I remember one person said sour cream was just creme fraiche, and it was almost like he literally chose the most basic of ingredients. I said just to see that you guys are not quite there yet. I think the most advanced thing they had was something called a sunchoke that I actually used for their risotto. But um, so you could possibly, train yourself a little bit more. I mean, that's kind of what, wine testers do. It's like, oh, this was in an oak barrel, not, I don't know what other kind of things are, but the fact that you could say, oh, this was a white oak, not a regular oak, might actually be a little bit different. So that's not so bad. But most of the time, people would associate um, one thing that actually would attribute to being superhuman is a sense of hearing when someone has lost their sight. A lot of people can, get by with the most basic of, you know, you know, just feeling their way around. I know they can use the cane. And they have like laser versions and other um, attributes as well. But if the problem is that if you hear something super super loud, that's a little too loud for a regular person, it's going to be very loud for all the other things. So it's almost like I used to hate fire trucks in parades as a little kid because it would just be just be too loud, and even when they were a good distance away, they were still blaring it and still blaring their sirens, and yet, deaf people can probably hear something from very far away. Even if you mutter something about them, all of a sudden it's like I heard that, and that definitely does seem to be an interesting thing. If you are do go blind, your sense of touch will actually be more improved. Probably because I said mostly through the usage of braille and just the you have to actually feel everything around you just to make sure that you're not about to touch something you shouldn't. Because if there's no chance of you actually seeing anything, um, it said you could actually be touching a barrel full of radioactive material as opposed to a barrel full of water. So if you don't feel anything, that's going to be an issue. But then again, something there can be other ways to actually compensate for that because I'm a massage therapist and I've noticed things in other people's bodies that I would not have noticed when I was just a little kid, giving casual neck and shoulder rubs to my grandparents. But now it's like, oh, this is a really tight band. Like, oh, you've got a lot of ground substance. Oh, I said, hey, I found a trigger point. Um, so it can be quite possible that if you are using your hands a lot, to actually feel the, for the smallest things, you actually can have it. So if you were essentially a blind massage therapist, you could probably tell. You say there's no telling what you could find. Maybe in this case, they would find a scar on you, and it's like, this is about 3 years old. And like I said, yes, but one thing that's always kind of popular for a lot of people, like a lot of metahumans to have in comics, would be other forms of sight. And while there are people that can definitely have like 20, 15 vision or 1520, I forget, I think it's 1520, like can be a little bit more advanced, can actually see things very far away. But if you were to put someone in, water, we see the world very differently through that. Everything seems different because our eyes cannot process it. Same way that if you're at a said like in the water and someone's playing music and you just go down just a little bit, um, the music said starts to not make sense. You can't really tell. You wouldn't actually you kind of think it's all is like from a different part, and then you submerge yourself just a little bit deeper, and then it's gone. So yeah, because I definitely would do see the appeal in actually having multiple types of vision. Mostly because the world is full of very dark places, so having be able to see an infrared and thermal vision would be quite helpful. Although modern day cameras tend to be, I don't know really what their range is. It kind of seems like you could definitely see something very well defined, but I said up close, but it's almost like you actually need glasses. The machine actually needs glasses to process anything far away. Is that ultraviolet might be another thing? Is that but may only be helpful if you're trying to find characters that can go invisible, because if they're just bending the light around them rather than like being totally invisible, there is still like you're going to see what's underneath. Because if you've ever been like on a city bus and they have like you really can't see what's on the windows from the outside, but you get in there and you realize, okay, there's just a bunch of holes there, and you can see just fine. So, which actually, so that's for me is kind of what invisibility actually is, you know. So you will, so essentially you're able to kind of see that, but um, I know that other animals could see ultraviolet lights, all the same, and maybe could even go like expose everything like a different world of color. But even I do know someone actually that can see a little bit into the ultraviolet, spectrum. It's just there's just a little bit more, what they could see, but not really entirely sure what that would do. I mean, but then again, X-ray vision is not what people think it is. Basically, X-rays have to bounce off of something to see it. That's why, um, they always need that sheet. When they actually, when the first guy ever took, the photo of his wife's hand, um, he actually had to put something underneath it because he wasn't actually able to see um, anything else. Like he wasn't seeing through her skin. It said in muscle. It said, but because the fact that the actual the film actually was able to kind of capture it. So you could actually see something that's giving off, essentially, would actually be giving off X-rays. Like I know the sea actually does have quite a bit of it, and then if you were to see like an X-ray pulse, that would be it, but it's not true X-ray vision. Essentially, what you actually are using is a more defined version of Wi-Fi because they can actually pinpoint a lot of things through. You said they go throughout your house, they can see everything, and they even show the fact that yes, this is what they could do, catch you on Wi-Fi doing whatever. Even if in this case it's just a weird kind of stick figure or a bunch of dots, the fact of the matter is you can still see through something. But something that might actually be a lot more helpful would be the ability to kind of adjust your eyes like binoculars and microscopes, because if something is like really, really far away, or like you're trying to see, look at a bird, up in the sky, it doesn't matter if you can see infrared or ultraviolet. You actually want to be able to see, like it's much closer to you. And magnifying, because apparently like trifocal glasses, can allow for a lot more finer reading. But if you look through the wrong part of the lens, you will go insane. I had a lot of teachers that talked about it, and I'm like, okay, and said that's going to be awkward. And then maybe some degree of microscopic vision might be able to detect you know you said something that might be very small. I said, or maybe even detect. I'm not entirely sure what you fully would need to detect. That's like so super small. Other than maybe trying to look for the presence of some type of germs, but the human body is actually full of its own microorganisms and every and fungus. So if you don't know what you're actually looking for, you're not going to say, "I want to." Said, "I can see. I can tell you that this fancy substance isn't gold, but iron pyrite." So that really wouldn't be much help. Well, but it could still be a part of it. But the thing is, we actually do have more senses. So one would say, like with time, we can definitely, you could be walking around, what time actually is. That it definitely has changed, even if it's like the middle of the night and, it said you're under a bunch of lights, so you can't actually look up, and see it said even the faintest of stars, the brightest of stars. You definitely perceive that. And it said, and another thing that actually could be, um, possibly would say that pain even might be a slightly different amount. I mean, some people can, be hurt and shake it off like it doesn't really hurt at all, and some people cry like little girls with skint knees. So it always kind of depends upon what else you would have, what your tolerance is. Um, if you're just kind of so like I used to wear sandals that went between so had a wedge that went between your toes that really hurt me for a while, and then it just kind of stopped. So if you're so maybe you're used to something a little bit differently. Just as in this case, if you're from like the northern part of the United States or Canada, you know, it said you could actually adapt. You said you may think like 40 degrees is nothing for you. I mean, I've even seen it said videos of Canadians said delivering the mail in shorts. So so essentially, if someone was to say, "Oh, it said, oh man, 50 degrees is quite much of a thing," these people would say, "It said I don't feel anything." Just, but it said when you kind of have the reverse, like if you're from a very hot place, yes, you may be used to it being a lot hotter. So if you were to go to a place that may experience a slightly warmer temperature than normal, if it's not above 100, it's like not so bad. But the problem is that you need to have a little bit of both because if something is way too cold, your body will lose heat a lot faster than you would want, and if it's something's way too hot, and especially and also dry, you're going to sweat, like no tomorrow, and lose way too much water, you know. So while you could possibly, be a hero that's, like a fire hero that maybe able to have a bit of buffness, it's a buffer against it. And same thing with ice characters. That doesn't actually mean everything is meant to be totally invincible. So yeah, that's what me so bad. Mostly just the fact that someone that maybe has moved around a lot may be able to handle it, but you know you would need almost the equivalent of the attributes of a well-trained, well seasoned firefighter. But then you may also need someone that said the acclamation of someone that works in Antarctica, because just be able to, but you would still need to be able to actually notice that. Like, yes, I can handle these differences in temperature, and I possibly would say what time says I know I said this is how long I would be able to have. So even that, so that's not too bad. Um, you may also would say maybe pressure might be something else. If there's way too much air pressure or not enough, you might be able to notice it a little bit. But the only thing I would think involving pressure is if someone is trying to actually is trying to squeeze you in some kind of embrace or medical procedure. You know, um, sometimes even some people bruise way too easily. Others would say no. I said that hurts way too much. Some people, I've worked on people that required feather light touch, and I've also worked on people that you literally have to dig so much into their muscles. It was almost like you were they were growing a turtle shell. Like you could feel the muscles underneath, actually shifting, but in this case, if you're not, it said if you need very deep, it said deep tissue work with a lot of pressure, you know, you're going to actually need that. So you could actually would say yes, I can definitely feel, could actually take, the strongest pressure possible, and still, for a long period of time with no ill will. And then maybe in terms of light pressure, maybe you could actually feel if something like a bug lands on you, and you can definitely say, okay, this bug is a certain size. Realize this is how much it is. It's probably not. It's probably going to bite me if I try anything. So you just kind of never know what actually would need, what actually a basic human would be. So it's kind of hard to determine what kind of metahuman someone could eventually end up becoming. Because I know that in a lot of Japanese shows, they often show characters, running, jumping, and you know, said other physical tasks like it's hardly anything. So it said, so if you're basing it off, would it base off your superhero persona off a regular human, you need to do a lot more growing to be able to kind of keep up with that. Or in this case, you can exceed someone from Japan, or other types of anime. I'm not entirely sure what other countries have, but to just barely go above them. But as I said, but if the same thing actually happens to one of these enhanced humans, these other already enhanced humans, there's no telling what they could possibly do. It's like seeing someone jump, insanely, say a very great distance without much of an issue. Always kind of comes to mind because in the first Common Rider season, um, he actually had a sidekick from the FBI that actually was shown jumping, pretty high. One of his first missions, he was actually able to clear a 10-foot tall gate and land like it wasn't even anything. So you also would say balance is another type of power that would probably be pretty good to have, because you never know when you might have to walk across something that's very narrow, um, or you're at the edge of something you don't want to just fall over because maybe you'll reveal something, you reveal your position, or you can't fly and just a sheer drop, down, down into some kind of abyss. So yeah. So all these kind of things can definitely. So even if they're said humans may not be able to have all the advanced attributes, necessary, but that doesn't mean there actually isn't, ways, some people can actually exceed everything. Say they make the best of it. You know, they know they're not going to be anything like totally superhuman um, for, I said, at any time at point in their lives, but maybe in this case, say they have just enough that they not only can get the job done, but they know they're still human. They're not, someone that's meant to be, you know, some form of entertainment for a bunch of, people that says, oh, it said, okay, yeah, now lift, something else, or jump over this, because who knows, because who knows what people will actually, want to see the actual limits. I mean, be almost like someone that seems to have a higher resistance for pain. It's one thing to basically, just, hit them or you said, or maybe with an object or your fist, but, you could actually walk up, to someone that, a pretty intense bodybuilder, and you could probably, just do a quick, cut of their skin and it's going to break. They're not meant to be superhuman. They're not meant to be invulnerable or anything else. So yeah, so give that some food for thought. The next video will be on a very popular superpower, flight. I said, and you'll definitely will rethink, some of the issues with flying. I said, and would show, um, when definitely will also understand that maybe that's not the first power you should choose. So have a good one.